Hey folks, it's Soul with your guide to Inscription in the War Within. We're going to go over gathering and early development, including Patron crafting orders, and then we're going to dive into the numerous builds of this very thirsty profession. Will you be a professional miller and provider of reagents? Will you support other professions with treatises and missives, maybe Darkmoon sigils, or maybe you'll make weapons? This is just one guide out of many in my oversized profession series of guides for the War Within, and I advise watching the intro video on the playlist to get accustomed to the general idea of how things work. A link to that is in the upper right corner and also down in the video description. As always, you can help out the channel by liking this video, subscribing for more WoW coverage, and catching me live on Twitch. And of course, please feel free to chime in on the comments if you have questions, or if I missed something, or if I got something wrong. Inscription is a bit of an oddball profession in that the bread and butter of what they make is meant to support other professions, and they otherwise make very few items that scream, yes, this is me, I'm a scribe, right? And I'm talking about the two staves and offhand weapon that they can make. One of the big changes happening in the War Within involve the Darkmoon Fair trinkets. The trinkets are still around, but you can use it as a reagent to make not an improved upgradable trinket, but an embellishment to slot into your gear of choice and get a fraction of the trinket's effect, I think. So again, not an item that stands on its own, but one that supports other professions. That said, Inscription is also involved with virtually every profession, thanks to Missives for stat customization and Treatises for upping profession skill. You'll do business, but early on, you'll want to decide on what part of the business to be in. The initial investment is pretty heavy, as you'll need to work with every kind of herb to create pigments, then inks, and then a series of reagents that'll ultimately make up many of your crafts. Let's get to leveling, and step 1 is to mill, which will make up your first 20 levels. Then it's just another few points until you can specialize. If you're interested in milling and developing inks, consider pausing to start investing into that spec, but otherwise, let's keep leveling and chatting while the B-roll plays. Unlike Dragonflight's Inscription, milling and crafting inks is pretty involved even early in this process. You'll need considerable skill to excel at milling high-quality pigments, same to make those pigments into inks, all the way up to your final craft. Part of the leveling process will involve making just enough of the right reagents from leveling to continue leveling. Without knowing what the final skill requirements will be, I direct you over to sites like wowprofessions.com, which feature easy-to-read guides to leveling your profession. As it stands right now, you can progress all the way to max level with just training recipes, like, hey, that's new. But this also underlines the point. Inscription isn't all that big on crafting orders as opposed to auction house sales. Knowing we can rely on the trainer, you shouldn't feel too much pressure to race to max level. I advise saving some gold. Wait until you actually need the skill level to unlock a tree or to raise that quality a bit higher. Helping you with leveling and development are Patron crafting orders. These will pop up at least every few days to give you work to do. This might feel extra punishing for scribes, knowing how demanding the profession can be for herbs, but completing them is way worth it. Doing these will give out prizes like profession knowledge, an obvious must-have, finishing reagents that add plus skill to crafts, and artisan acuity. You'll be needing those to buy certain crafting recipes, and later on, bags of resources you can reapply to your crafting. Some of these crafting orders may ask for higher quality than what you can currently do, which is where concentration comes in. And early on, I suggest going for broke if the reward at the end is good enough. Going forward, this guide will assume that you're at a skill level of 75 and can access all 4 spec trees. Sort of like alchemy and jewel crafting, Inscription is particularly sensitive because you're making lots of goods, all desired at high quality. Like the person who's trying to hard farm reputation, they're not going to settle for a rank 2 contract, they're going to want the good stuff, they want that good investment. The same goes for Vantus runes and missives. Skimping out on quality is a pretty big loss. So your objective is going to be to craft these as cheaply as possible, whether they need you to craft that rune or if they need you to craft those high quality inks to make that rune. There are 4 specializations. Pursuit of Knowledge is where you go to make yourself a treatise for Inscription, and where you go to refine your secondary stats as in multicraft, resourcefulness, and ingenuity. Pursuit of Perfection is the processing tree for everything reagent related, including the milling of herbs and making inks. Careful Carvings covers a bit of a spread, from equipment to profession tools. Archival Editions is also a wide tree covering Darkmoon sigils, Vantus runes, missives, and contracts. There are some important questions you want to ask yourself, like do you want to bark in trade chat or mostly play the auction house? Are you going to be using this character on a regular basis? Do you have an herbalist to support your crafting? There's a lot to consider, and fortunately, choosing a specialization is pretty straightforward. Okay, mostly. Okay, let's take a look at some example builds starting with reagents under Pursuit of Perfection. Learning it will allow you to immediately choose a subspec, either pigments, inks, or reagents, which is how the stages of production are ordered. Which part of the process do you want to be a part of? Honestly, no matter what, your best bet would be to max out the base trait anyway up here, because that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, but you still need to choose. The only wrong choice to make is, funny enough, trying to develop all three at the same time. The way I'm looking at it, once you have one of these specs maxed out, and you have max skill, which is pretty easy, and rare quality tools, then you're good. You've mastered crafting something. Now it might be in your best interest to slide over to Pursuit of Knowledge and max out the secondary stats that are important for whatever you spec into. For example, if you want to be a superior milling person, you want to max out the base trait and the resourcefulness thing right down here. Also make sure you're using a tool spec for resourcefulness as well. Our approach shifts for inks or reagents which use multicraft as a stat. No matter what you do though, it is in your interest to learn this spec even if you put 0 points into it, because it lets you learn how to make treatises. You start off learning how to make one for Inscription and have a chance to learn the other profession treatises. If you have the materials and you happen to see demand through crafting orders, even Patron crafting orders, start fulfilling stuff while learning recipes. And this should be pretty easy gold for you, especially early on when folks are trying to get ahead on their professions. Making gear is pretty straightforward. Under careful carvings, you can immediately choose combative curiosities and then either staves or torches to learn the recipe for creating an agility staff with no points spent. Or you can add 5 points to learn the caster staff recipe. Of course though, you suck at making both, so it's in your interest to add plenty of points down the line. Start with the staves trait so you can add finishing reagents, and then keep adding points until you can at least craft this at a rank 4 with good materials. This way you can at least say in trade chat, yeah, you can craft a rank 5 as long as you have concentration, and then charge a buttload and come back in a few days to do it again. I'm suggesting this route because I'm just going to take a guess and say that there won't be a long line of people wanting staves made, but they're going to be there. The same approach applies if you want to go for offhands on the other side. Personally, I think there's going to be a lot more interest in profession tools in this tree, notably the Alchemist Rod, because they're a bunch of suckers for skill, just like you. The thing is, you need to find the recipe for this in a delve. Personally, I haven't found it, so there's a measure of risk to be had going for this, but if you are one of the early folks to get this recipe on your server, you'll be a hero. And rich. Out of the 3 tools, I do suggest the Alchemy Rod first, but that's, well, maybe it's also a distraction. Somewhere out there are other scribes like you maybe, and chefs who are looking for good tools, and maybe you can fill that gap instead. So to master these, go right down the line just like gear, but keep in mind, after you make one choice, you need to fully max out the base node to choose the other side. It's another reminder that you shouldn't pivot midway through. Going for missives, contracts, and or Vantus runes is going to be a big investment to make. Over here in this tree, you need to add 10 points to the subspec in order to learn one of these traits. Missives are probably the most safe and steady, but with that, arguably low profit, because lots of people will likely take this route too. Still, missives are impactful and needed for every profession. You can count on regular traffic on the auction house, and like everything else made in the War Within, these will consume large amounts of resources as in herbs. With the way gathering seems to work, it may not be as easy to pump out rank 3 missives like nothing, so, well, just like anything and everything else consumable, once you choose a path, commit to it. Anyway, it's a straight line to master missives or Vantus runes or contracts, whichever you choose. But there are also consequences. Missives for gear, that is combat stats, those are learned via trainer, but you can also learn missives for profession equipment, which will be super valuable even if the market might be smaller. Each recipe will cost 150 artisan acuity each, and some are more valuable than others. I predict Perception to be the first that you want to pick up. It's the most popular for gatherers, followed by Multicraft for mass crafters, then Resourcefulness for most general crafting. You may also want to consider Finesse depending on how the material market's looking. Vantus runes are very straightforward. In fact, you learn the Raids rune from the trainer, which is both great and terrible because you're going to have lots of competition. On the other hand, you might be one of the few that can make this at a rank 3, and maybe there won't be as much competition. Contracts are also very accessible. There's no reputation required, you just need to buy it with artisan acuity again. But at a max of 15 bonus reputation per world quest, well, going hard on contracts and world quests, it's definitely a choice. Finally, we need to talk about Darkmoon's sigils, but it's also hard to talk about this. As of this writing, I can't say with confidence that the stats that we're seeing are going to be what makes it live, but here's what we know. Creating Darkmoon decks are what they've been since like forever. There's a low chance of finding cards throughout the world, you put them together, and you make a trinket. In Dragonflight, these were used to make upgradable versions of the trinkets. In the War Within, they're used to create embellishments to slot into gear. Shown here are the current sigils and related cards. As you can see, not every card's effect matches the same potency when it's turned into a sigil. It begs the question, which is the correct implementation? The 3 where the effect is unchanged, or the 1 where the effect is nerfed from trinket to sigil? The latter is, I guess it's more likely, but I'm going to leave this as being uncertain for now. But let's say you are interested in these sigils, or at the least, you're interested in farming up the cards to sell. If you just want to sell, you'll need to follow this sort of setup. 15 points in each of the 4 deck types will increase your chances to find any Darkmoon cards. It doesn't raise your chances for a specific deck type though. According to Wowhead, finding these cards is a world drop or found from fishing. Speccing into all 4 means a 200% rate increase, but you're also looking at a full 90 points before you maximize this drop rate. If you want to craft these, fully maxing this out is needed to both master the craft and to transform 2 unwanted cards into one of the deck type you want. I don't really have any advice on which card to go for, but whichever you do, you just want to focus on one at a time. These recipes are interesting too because the likes of resourcefulness and multi-craft apply. Once again, I couldn't test this, but there's an unlikely chance that one could proc resourcefulness on the card or multi-craft the sigil itself, so after completing the spec, you want to max out your multi-craft first, then resourcefulness. Whatever the case, this is still a risky spec, and one that you'll want to have on a character you're playing a lot so you get the most opportunities for drops. Let's go over some tool recommendations real quick. For milling and fulfilling crafting orders, go double resourcefulness as in the missive and the enchant. For the majority of your crafts, you'll want to go multi-craft and resourcefulness. If you're in any situation where you need to use ingenuity and you intend to keep crafting that day, go double ingenuity. There's also a special inscription bag you can pick up. This is something you might be interested in if you're going all in for Darkmoon sigils, but otherwise you can probably skip it for now. Inscription has a mix of safe bets and risky choices, with a straightforward but sometimes long specialization path. It can also feel a little bit pricey and time-consuming with lots of processing of materials before you can get to crafting. But the profession is also very necessary to the rest of the profession ecosystem, and you can play a big part in it once you decide on a spec, and very importantly, stick to it until the end before trying something else. And that's going to be the guide. Please like the video if it was useful, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live, and of course leave your feedback, your questions, and your corrections. I'm doing these to help all of us get a better understanding, maybe even find some success, so let's help each other out. I'll see you next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.